The only number anyone in that room cared about was a $250,000 loss. According to my boss, every dollar of that loss was my fault. The conference room was completely silent. A spreadsheet showing the missing amount filled the screen. My boss didn't hesitate. After reviewing everything, we've concluded this happened because of you. The HR manager quietly slid a termination letter across the table. No investigation. No questions. No chance to explain. Around the room, a few people looked relieved. Someone had to take the fall. And today, it was me. So I signed the paperwork, picked up my laptop, and walked out without saying a word. What none of them knew was that they had just fired the only person who could prove what really happened. 72 hours later. The same boss who blamed me would be begging me not to leave. And before it was over, his own boss would be demanding answers he couldn't answer. 3 months earlier. If you had walked into the 12th floor of our company, you never would have noticed me. I wasn't the loudest person in the office. I wasn't the one giving presentations or sitting in executive meetings. Most people couldn't even tell you exactly what I did. And honestly, that was perfectly fine with me. My name is Ethan Walker, and I worked as a senior documentation and compliance specialist for one of the fastest-growing logistics software companies in Chicago. My job wasn't glamorous. I didn't close million-dollar deals. I didn't wear expensive suits. I didn't spend my afternoons playing office politics. I built systems. Every approval. Every software change. Every client requirement. Every contract revision. Every compliance checkpoint. If something important happened inside the company, sooner or later, it crossed my desk. Most people thought documentation was just paperwork. They were wrong. In a company handling contracts worth millions of dollars, documentation wasn't paperwork. It was evidence. It was accountability. Sometimes. It was the only thing standing between a successful project and a lawsuit. That's why I had a simple rule. If someone gave me instructions over the phone, I followed up with an email. If a decision was made during a meeting, I documented who approved it. If someone wanted to skip a required compliance step, I asked them to confirm it in writing. Some coworkers joked that I trusted folders more than people. Maybe they were right. Because files don't lie. People do. Most of my team appreciated that. My manager didn't. Michael Grant believed speed was everything. He loved deadlines. He loved impossible promises. And he hated anyone who slowed a project down with questions about policies or risk. Whenever I raised a concern, he'd smile and say the same thing. Ethan, you're overthinking it. Maybe I was. Or maybe I had simply seen enough companies lose millions because someone ignored one small warning. At the time, I had no idea one of those warnings was about to become the biggest decision of my career. And when it did, the file everyone ignored would become the one thing they couldn't survive without. About 6 weeks before everything fell apart, the company signed the biggest contract it had ever won. The client expected a flawless software rollout. The project budget alone exceeded $250,000. For everyone else, it was a celebration. For me, it was a warning. The implementation schedule was already tight when Michael Grant called an emergency meeting. He stood in front of the conference room with the confidence of someone who believed deadlines could replace preparation. "We're moving the launch forward by 2 weeks," he announced. The room went silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Testing would be shortened. Approvals would be rushed. Documentation would fall behind. I raised my hand. If we skip the remaining compliance reviews, we'll lose our entire change history. If something goes wrong, we won't be able to prove who approved what. Michael didn't even look at my notes. Instead, he smiled. Ethan, clients pay us for results, not paperwork. A few people laughed. I didn't. Because paperwork wasn't what I was talking about. I was talking about evidence. After the meeting, I sent a detailed email outlining every risk created by the accelerated timeline. An hour later, Michael replied with only one sentence. Proceed as instructed. No explanation. No discussion. Just 4 words. So I did exactly what I had always done. I followed the instructions. And documented every single one of them. Every approval. Every design revision. Every emergency change. Every deadline that had been moved. Every warning that had been ignored. Instead of scattering everything across dozens of folders, I built one master change control file. It wasn't just a folder. It was a complete timeline of the project. Every document connected. Every version cross-referenced. Every approval linked to the person who made it. If anyone ever asked how a single decision had been made, the answer was already there. Michael saw me updating it one evening as everyone else was leaving. He leaned against my desk and laughed. You're still wasting time on that file? I looked up. If this project ever goes sideways, this file will explain exactly why. He shook his head. Nothing's going to go sideways. Then he walked away. I watched him disappear down the hallway. Wondering whether he actually believed that. Or simply needed everyone else to. 3 weeks later. The project exploded. And the first person Michael blamed was me. Launch day arrived on a Tuesday morning. By 8 a.m., everyone was in position. The client had executives joining remotely. Our leadership team was gathered in the main conference room. For the first 20 minutes, everything looked perfect. Then my phone started vibrating. One notification. Then another. Then 10 more. Support tickets were pouring in. Warehouse employees couldn't process shipments. Inventory numbers weren't syncing. Orders were disappearing from the dashboard. Within minutes, the client's operations director requested an emergency call. The room that had been celebrating just moments earlier became completely silent. Nobody spoke. Everyone waited for someone else to explain what had happened. Michael stood up first. He didn't ask IT for a diagnosis. He didn't ask engineering what they were seeing. He didn't ask me a single question. Instead, he looked directly at me. Ethan, where's the final documentation package? I answered honestly. The package reflects every approved change. It doesn't cause system failures. He ignored the answer. Then explain why we're looking at a $250,000 loss. Every head in the room turned toward me. The client was still connected. HR was taking notes. Finance had already started estimating the damage. I realized something in that moment. This meeting wasn't about finding the cause. It was about finding someone to blame. Michael spoke again. The implementation records were Ethan's responsibility. That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. No one questioned it. No one asked who approved the rushed changes. No one mentioned the emails. No one mentioned the deadlines that had been moved. The room had already accepted its version of the story. And in that version, I was the problem. An hour later, HR asked me to step into a private office. They said the company was opening a formal investigation. Until it was complete, my system access would be suspended. My company laptop would be collected. And I was instructed not to contact the client directly. I handed over my badge without arguing. Not because I believed I was guilty, but because I already knew something they didn't. While everyone was focused on the system failure, nobody had looked at the approval history. Nobody had compared the last-minute changes against my documented warnings. And most importantly, Nobody remembered the master change control file Michael had laughed at just weeks earlier. As I walked out of the building carrying nothing but my laptop bag, I couldn't stop thinking about one question. If they were so certain I caused the disaster, why were they afraid of looking at the evidence? I would have my answer in less than 72 hours. By the time I got home, the company had already locked me out of every internal system. My work email was gone. My employee account had been disabled. Even my office messaging app had stopped working. It was as if 3 years of my career had been erased in less than 2 hours. I set my laptop bag on the kitchen table and poured myself a cup of coffee. For the first time that day, everything was quiet. No conference rooms. No accusations. No emails demanding answers. Just silence. Then my eyes landed on a small encrypted external drive sitting beside my home monitor. Most people would have walked right past it. I didn't. Because I knew exactly what was inside. Not confidential client data. Not stolen company files. Nothing illegal. It contained something far more valuable. A legally authorized disaster recovery archive that I had built throughout the project. Months earlier, after watching deadlines move and approvals disappear, I had proposed creating an independent change validation archive. The company's compliance officer had approved it in writing. Its only purpose was simple. If the live project records were ever corrupted, deleted, or questioned during an audit, the archive could reconstruct the complete decision history. Every approved change. Every rejected request. Every meeting summary. Every version comparison. Every electronic approval. Everything was preserved exactly as it existed on the day it happened. I plugged the drive into my personal computer. The authentication screen appeared. 2 passwords. A security key. Then, thousands of indexed records filled the screen. I didn't open a single document. I didn't have to. Just seeing the archive told me something important. The truth hadn't disappeared. It had been waiting. I leaned back in my chair and replayed the launch meeting in my head. Michael had been unusually confident. Too confident. Almost as if he already knew exactly who would be blamed before anyone had investigated the failure. That thought refused to leave my mind. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I ignored it. 30 seconds later. Another call. Different number. Then another. 3 missed calls in less than 5 minutes. I frowned. HR had fired me. So why was the company suddenly trying so hard to reach me? I would find out the next morning. When the first person who called wasn't asking about my termination. They were asking about one file they suddenly couldn't find. The next morning. I didn't wake up to an alarm. I woke up to my phone vibrating across the nightstand. 8 missed calls. 4 voicemails. 2 emails from addresses I didn't recognize. None of them had existed yesterday. I made coffee before checking any of them. If the company wanted something, they could wait. The first voicemail wasn't from Michael. It was from Karen, our director of compliance. Her voice sounded nothing like it usually did. Ethan, call me as soon as you can. This is bigger than we thought. I frowned. Karen was the calmest person in the company. If she sounded nervous, something serious had happened. The second voicemail came from our IT director. We're trying to verify the project's change history. Some records don't match what's on the production server. Call me. Now I was paying attention. Then came the third message. This one wasn't a voicemail. It was an email marked urgent. The subject line read, "Outside audit scheduled, 72 hours." I read it twice. The client hadn't simply reported the failure. They had demanded an independent audit. According to the contract, the company now had 72 hours to produce a complete record showing who approved every critical project decision. Without that documentation, the company couldn't prove it had followed its own procedures. It couldn't defend itself against the client's claims. And it certainly couldn't explain why the rollout had failed. For the first time since I had been fired, everything made sense. They weren't calling because they felt guilty. They were calling because they had run out of options. I opened the encrypted archive one more time. Every approval was there. Every rejected recommendation. Every emergency change request. Every email chain. Every executive sign-off. Every warning I had documented. Nothing was missing. Which raised an even bigger question. If my archive was complete, why was the company's official record incomplete? I wasn't the only one asking that question. By noon, a former coworker finally called from his personal phone. He didn't waste time pretending it was a friendly conversation. "Ethan, people are saying entire approval logs disappeared after your account was disabled." I stared at the screen in silence. That wasn't possible. The logs couldn't simply disappear. Unless someone had been depending on my master file without ever realizing it. Before I could respond, another call came through. This time, the caller ID showed a name I never expected to see. Michael Grant. Less than 24 hours after blaming me for a $250,000 mistake. My boss wasn't calling to accuse me anymore. He was calling because he needed the one file he once laughed at. The phone rang for almost 30 seconds before I answered. I didn't say hello. Neither did Michael. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Ethan, we need to talk." Yesterday, he had blamed me in front of the entire leadership team. Today, he sounded like a completely different person. I kept my voice calm. "About what?" There was another pause. "The audit team is reviewing the project. They're asking for documentation we can't locate." I already knew exactly which documentation he meant. But I wasn't going to make this easy. "I'm not sure I understand." His tone became more careful. "That master file you kept, the one with all the approval records. The same file he had laughed at. The same file he called a waste of time. Now it suddenly mattered. Didn't the company keep its own records?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sighed. "Some information isn't where it's supposed to be." That sentence told me more than he intended. If the official records were incomplete, someone inside the company had a much bigger problem than a failed software launch. Michael tried another approach. "Look, let's not make this personal." I almost laughed. 24 hours earlier, he had made it as personal as possible. Now he wanted to pretend none of it had happened. "You terminated me yesterday," I reminded him. "You told everyone I caused a $250,000 loss." "I know how it looked." He interrupted. "No," I said quietly. "You know exactly what you said." The line went silent again. When he spoke this time, the confidence was gone. "The CEO is asking questions I can't answer." That caught my attention. Until now, I thought this was only Michael's problem. Apparently, it had reached the executive level. "Then answer them honestly," I replied. "I can't," he admitted. Those 3 words changed everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, my boss wasn't trying to control the situation. He was trying to survive it. A few minutes after the call ended, another number appeared on my phone. This time it was Karen from compliance. "Ethan, I'm calling as a friend," she said. "The auditors aren't just reviewing the failed rollout anymore. They're comparing approval timelines, email records, and policy exceptions. They believe critical decisions were made outside the documented process. I closed my eyes. Exactly what I had warned about. They're asking whether anyone maintained an independent project history, she continued. I told them I didn't know. She paused before asking the question everyone had been avoiding. Did you? I looked at the encrypted drive sitting on my desk. Months of work. Thousands of records. The complete history of every decision. Yes, I answered. I did. Karen didn't sound surprised. She sounded relieved. Don't send it to anyone yet, she said. Not until you have legal representation. Things are moving very fast inside the company. That was the second time someone had warned me to be careful. First the evidence. Now a lawyer. This was no longer just about recovering a missing file. Something much bigger was happening behind those office walls. Then my phone buzzed again. A text message from Michael. Only 6 words. Please don't give it to them first. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time. I answered before it could go to voicemail. Michael didn't waste time pretending everything was normal. Ethan, can we meet? Not, come back to work. Not, let's discuss your termination. Just. Can we meet? 24 hours ago, he had all the power. Now he was asking for mine. I agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop a few blocks away from the office. When I arrived, he was already there. His coffee sat untouched. His phone kept lighting up with notifications he ignored. For the first time since I'd known him. He looked exhausted. As I sat down, he forced a smile. I appreciate you coming. I didn't respond. He leaned forward. We need that archive. The first thing he cared about wasn't my job. It wasn't the false accusation. It wasn't even the damage to my reputation. It was the file. Why? I asked. He rubbed his forehead. The auditors want a complete decision history. The CEO wants answers before tomorrow morning. Without those records. He stopped speaking. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew. For months, he had treated documentation like an obstacle. Now it was the only thing standing between him and a disaster. He looked directly at me. If you give us the archive, I'll make this right. How? We'll reverse the termination. I stayed silent. We'll restore your position. Still nothing. We'll discuss a raise, a promotion, whatever it takes. Yesterday, he believed I was disposable. Today. Apparently, I was priceless. I finally spoke. Michael, do you remember what you told me the day you laughed at that file? He looked confused. You said clients pay for results, not paperwork. His eyes dropped to the table. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he quietly admitted. I was wrong. Those were words I never expected to hear from him. But they still weren't enough. This isn't about my job anymore, I said. This is about the truth. He nodded slowly. What do you want? I had been thinking about that question since the moment he called. Not revenge. Not money. Not even my old position. I wanted the record corrected. I wanted a written statement clearing my name. I wanted every document related to my termination preserved. And I wanted every conversation from this point forward in writing. Michael looked surprised. That's it? No, I replied. There's one more condition. He waited. Before anyone sees that archive, my attorney sees it first. His face went pale. He hadn't expected a lawyer. He had expected gratitude. Instead, he realized this conversation was no longer happening on his terms. Just then, his phone rang again. He glanced at the screen. Then immediately stood up. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "It's the CEO." He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't anger. It was fear. And judging by the look on his face, the conversation waiting for him was about to change everything. Michael left the coffee shop without finishing his drink. I stayed where I was. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because something didn't make sense. If the CEO was suddenly involved, then this had grown far beyond one failed project. About an hour later, my attorney called. I'd already forwarded him the approval letter authorizing the disaster recovery archive, along with the emails proving it had been created under company policy. His advice was simple. Do not hand anything over unless every request is made in writing. That afternoon, the written request finally arrived. It wasn't signed by Michael. It came directly from the company's legal department. For the first time, the company officially acknowledged that the archive existed. My attorney reviewed the request, made a few revisions, and replied with one condition. The archive would be released only during the independent audit, with every party present. No private meetings. No missing pages. No selective evidence. Everything would be reviewed exactly as it existed. The next morning, I walked into a conference room I'd never expected to see again. The atmosphere was nothing like my termination meeting. This time, no one was speaking. The independent auditors sat at one end of the table. The company's legal team sat at the other. The CEO was already there. Michael avoided looking at me. One of the auditors broke the silence. "Mr. Walker, can you confirm this archive is an unaltered record created during the project?" "Yes," I answered. Every entry was created at the time each event occurred. Nothing was added after my termination. He nodded. "Please begin." I connected the encrypted drive. Entered the authentication key. Then the second password. The project timeline appeared on the screen. Hundreds of entries. Perfectly organized. The lead auditor selected a random approval from 3 months earlier. The archive opened the request. The manager who submitted it. The executive who approved it. The exact time. And the follow-up email confirming the decision. Then he selected another. Same result. Then another. Again. Everything matched. The room grew quieter with every click. The auditors weren't searching for mistakes anymore. They were testing whether the archive could be trusted. It passed every test. Then one auditor asked a question no one in the room wanted to hear. "Show us the approval for moving the implementation date forward." I opened the record. The meeting notes appeared. Then the email summary. Then the approval chain. Every executive who had agreed to shorten testing was listed. Including Michael. The auditor looked up. Was Mr. Walker the approving authority for this decision? No, another auditor answered before anyone else could. He documented the decision. He didn't authorize it. The room fell silent. The lead auditor continued reviewing the timeline. Every warning I had submitted appeared exactly where it should. Every risk assessment. Every recommendation to delay the rollout. Every written response instructing the team to continue anyway. One document after another. The story everyone believed began falling apart. Then came the final record. The email Michael had sent after my last warning. 4 words. Proceed as instructed. The timestamp matched. The approval chain matched. The project timeline matched. There was nothing left to argue about. The CEO slowly turned toward Michael. He didn't raise his voice. He asked only one question. "Did you know these warnings existed?" Michael tried to answer. No words came out. For the first time since this nightmare began. The evidence wasn't defending me. It was speaking for itself. And judging by the expressions around the room, the next decision wasn't going to be about my future. It was going to be about his. The meeting ended without anyone saying a word. One by one, people gathered their laptops and quietly walked out. No one looked at me. No one looked at Michael. The evidence had done something no argument ever could. It had changed the truth everyone believed. About 20 minutes later, my attorney received an email from the company's legal department. They wanted to resolve my termination immediately. Not next week. Not after another investigation. Immediately. By the end of the afternoon, I was invited back to headquarters. This time, not through the employee entrance. I was escorted directly to the executive floor. The atmosphere felt completely different. Just 48 hours earlier, security had walked me out of the building. Now executives were holding doors open for me. The CEO was waiting inside the boardroom. He stood as I entered. "Mr. Walker, on behalf of this company, I owe you an apology." He didn't try to justify what had happened. He didn't blame miscommunication. He didn't call it a misunderstanding. He accepted responsibility. "You were judged before the facts were reviewed. That should never have happened." For the first time since this started, someone inside that company finally admitted the truth. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was an official letter. My termination was being withdrawn. My personnel record would be corrected. Every document stating that I was responsible for the failed rollout would be removed from my employment file. The CEO looked at me. "We would like you to return. Your position, your salary, and your seniority will all be fully restored." A week earlier, that offer would have meant everything. Now, it meant almost nothing. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I appreciate the offer," I said. "But I won't be coming back." The room fell silent. The CEO looked surprised. "May I ask why?" I nodded. "Because trust is harder to rebuild than software. The day I needed this company to investigate the facts, it chose the easier story instead. I can't build a future in a place that was willing to erase my reputation in a single meeting." No one argued. No one tried to change my mind. Deep down, they already knew I was right. Before I left, the CEO said something that stayed with me. "Your archive didn't just protect you. It protected the truth." 3 days after I had been blamed for a $250,000 mistake, the company no longer needed someone to blame. It needed someone it could have trusted from the beginning. Unfortunately for them, they realized that after I was already walking away. 3 months later, I was sitting in a different office. A different company. A different team. Nobody there knew me as the employee who had been blamed for a $250,000 mistake. They knew me for something much more valuable. The person who never guessed. The person who documented. The person who made sure facts existed before opinions did. The company eventually settled its dispute with the client. The rollout was rebuilt. Several internal policies were rewritten. Every major project now required the same documentation process Michael had once called a waste of time. Ironically, the file everyone laughed at became the company's new standard. As for Michael, I never saw him again. I heard enough to know his career didn't end because of one failed project. It ended because, when the truth mattered most, he had nothing to support his version of the story. I did. Sometimes people think power belongs to the person with the biggest office, or the loudest voice in the meeting. They're wrong. Real power belongs to the person who can prove what actually happened. That week taught me something I'll never forget. A lie can win a meeting. It can win an argument. It can even cost someone their job. But when the evidence finally arrives, The truth doesn't need to be louder. It only needs to be complete. So if there's one lesson I carried with me after everything that happened, it's this. Never underestimate the value of keeping a record when everyone else is relying on their memory. Because 72 hours after my boss blamed me for a $250,000 mistake. He wasn't asking for another explanation. He wasn't looking for another excuse. He was looking for the one file he never believed he would need. By then, it wasn't my job that needed saving. It was his. And that's a difference he'll probably remember for the rest of his life.